Is the United Kingdom government protecting grooming gangs guilty of child sexual abuse that has involved thousands of girls, underage girls, over the years? Or is it all abrasive, dangerous politics? Opinion is divided in the United Kingdom and across the world. And today on this broadcast, we'll try and make sense of what the truth actually is. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. Elon Musk has made it his mission to shine a global light on what's being called the grooming gang row in the United Kingdom. Over the decades, thousands of underage girls have been ensnared, lured, and threatened and have been victims of child sexual abuse. Most of the perpetrators have been found to be of Pakistani origin. But there is now a huge polarizing debate within the United Kingdom. The Keir Starmer government has voted to reject the need for a new national inquiry. The opposition Conservatives are accusing it of protecting pedophiles. The Starmer government is hitting back and saying, you're joining the bandwagon now. What were you doing for the past decade? Are you responding only to Elon Musk? There is also the question of why Musk is so obsessed with this entire issue. And in all of this noise, what actually happens to the victims, to the survivors, of which there is no doubt there are many. And like with grooming gangs everywhere in the world, these young girls have been lured and trapped in a multifaceted set of ways, whether it's online luring with gifts or overt threats. Some reports even record the threat of petrol bombs. To try and make sense of what the truth is, what's actually going on, what is the grooming gang controversy that is rocking the United Kingdom and having a geopolitical spillover, let me introduce four guests from the United Kingdom today to try and understand from their own perspective what's going on. I'm joined by Aisha Ali Khan. She's a teacher and an activist. Aisha, it's good to see you. Also joining me is foreign policy expert Chris Blackburn. Chris, welcome back to the program. Bharat Ramanan, strategic affairs expert, political analyst, is with us. Welcome back, Bharat. And seeing after ages is my friend B. Rowlatt. Some of us know her from her and her partner Justin's stint as journalists in India. It's good to see you, B, after a long time. Great to see all of you. Let me, without further ado, play out the first clip from a debate inside the UK Parliament, where the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is told by the opposition leader, don't be a lawyer, be a leader. You are protecting pedophiles. I'm summarizing here. You are not thinking of the victims and survivors. This is how the UK Prime Minister finding himself at the receiving end of an attack from the opposition.
We need to focus on what this is really about. This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you. It is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this.
Only a national inquiry can solve it. As of now, the Labour government has decided against the national inquiry. The Starmer government and the UK PM have responded. Their main question seems to be, where were the Conservatives all these years? Take a look.
The Leader of the Opposition has been an MP, I think, for 8 years. Her party have been in government for 7.5 of those 8 years. She was the Children's Minister. She was the Women's and Equalities Minister. I can't remember her, I can't recall her once raising this issue in the House, once calling for a national inquiry. It's only in recent days she's jumped on the bandwagon. Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, if I'm wrong about that, and she has raised it, then I invite her to say that now, and I will happily withdraw the remark that she hasn't raised it in this House in the 8 years that she's been here until today.
That's the politics. What's actually going on? Can we separate the politics from the truth? B, I'd like to start with you. This goes back decades. This is not a recent development. And we have seen, or I've been trying to read up, there's been a review report by the mayor of Manchester as recently as in 2024 that documents 1,400 underage girls who were abused in the time period between 1997 and 2013. It also does document that 8 of the 9 convicts happened to be British Pakistani. Now, the debate seems to be, why is there a hesitation to say that? Why are we not looking at an ethnic background if there is a commonality to what's being discovered? And B, has there been a cover-up? Has there been a looking away in the name of political correctness? That's the main allegation against the Starmer government. How do you see it?
This is a fascinating case. And it was interesting that Kemi Badenoch said, let's focus on the victims, because suddenly now everybody's using those very victims for their own political advantage, which is quite a squalid spectacle. And it's not just here in the UK. As we've seen, it's being weaponized further afield. The thing that is extraordinary about this, if you step back, is that we have an unstable billionaire in the US screaming hysterically at a democratically elected female politician who has, anybody that knows anything about Jess Phillips is that it is her life's work to protect women and girls. So my background is women's rights, her background is women's rights. That's what everybody knows about Jess Phillips. So when Elon Musk wades into this, seemingly unarmed with any facts whatsoever, and any sense of what journalists and people that have followed the story very carefully over decades have been saying about it, you have to wonder what's really happening here. And I'm glad you're asking what's really happening here. What's happening here is the weaponization of victims is it's an ancient spectacle, if you like. It's an ancient trope of protecting our women. And you see this in religious texts around the world. You see it in Greek mythology. It's been around for a very, very long time. We saw it in the love jihad story in India. The idea of protecting our women is combined with the threat of foreign invader, in this case, conveniently, Muslims. So it fuels a number of other very, very flammable political debates, which are extremely useful for people like Elon Musk. That's what his platform thrives on. If he cares so much about women and girls, maybe he could protect female journalists from death threats that persistently follow them for doing their jobs. Maybe he could put a little work into his own backyard. Well, that's my take for a start.
I think that's a great point about how hostile, how sexually abusive a platform like Twitter, now called X, can be. I think we've all been at the receiving end of it. Very quickly, before I open it up, I take the point about the weaponization of victims, the sort of paternalism about women, the weaponization, which actually completely forgets the victims and the survivors. But how do you specifically respond to the criticism that the government chose not to order a national inquiry? It would have been an easy thing to announce a national inquiry and say, let the facts speak.
There has been an inquiry, the J inquiry. There have been a number of regional inquiries. I'm not completely up to date with all of the details of the various stages of progress of the inquiries, but Andrew Norfolk, who's one of the earlier people who broke this story, Justin Rowlatt broke it first in Keithley, vested interest there, that's my husband. But Andrew Norfolk was an amazing advocate and reported this for the Times newspaper for over a decade. And in a recent interview, he completely vindicated Keir Starmer, who, as a public prosecutor, changed the law so that more of the abusers and more of the predators could be put in prison. So not only that, but anyone that knows anything about Jess Phillips also knows that what she cares about is protecting women and girls. So it really does sort of shred those allegations down to what really is the essence of, brings us back to political advantage seizing from a very horrific situation of abuse.
Bharat, let me bring you in. When you and I were chatting yesterday about the issue, you said, yes, of course, there's politics. But for you, that there is politics doesn't actually change the fact that there is a horror at the heart of this. And that is where everybody's attention should, in fact, be. Come in with your thoughts at this point.
Thanks very much for having me, Barkha, and Happy New Year to you and your viewers. So you're right. Look, the first point I want to make is this is not an issue where you take a position based on your ideology or your party. It's a human issue. And the fact that people are fighting over which party did what is a bit disappointing, to say the least. Now, of course, as you rightly mentioned, politics is being played, and it feeds into the anti-immigrant rhetoric also, I'm afraid. And Mr. Musk has certainly made this a lot worse, if you like, by his vitriolic attacks on Prime Minister Starmer. Now, look, I don't think the vote on its own would have passed muster, pure numbers basically. But on a moral standpoint, why would you not let an inquiry happen, again, for the benefit for all to see, given the kind of sort of furor that it's already caused? And I think by voting it down to some degree, Labour plays into this increasingly held view amongst people, and I've spoken to a number of them since we last spoke, that something's not quite right, something's being covered up. And we live in a world where perception matters, right? So I think there's enough room here now that's been created for doubt that enough wasn't done. And how else can you explain this magnitude, Barkha? Whether this counts as gross negligence or a cover-up, whatever it is, it makes nobody here feel better. And the government ultimately has to build, trust with its citizens. And that's where, the bottom line is.
And to that extent, Bharat, before I go to Chris, do you believe that trust has broken down between people and the government on this issue? Or do you believe that, like most other issues of our time, depending on who you vote for is how you define this issue? Like, has there been any sort of transcending of party lines on this issue?
I mean, look, if you think in terms of trust, the social contract between the citizen and the government, and I've been here about a little over 10 odd years, and I've noticed that that's been steadily declining, right? Because there have been a number of issues with whatever party was in power, where people have had issues with the way they did things. Now, if you look at this specific case, there have been several local inquiries, as you pointed out in your initial remarks, into these supposed grooming gangs, and also a longish national inquiry. Now, if this has been going on since 2010, and we're in 25 now, and we're all outraged even today, that means something hasn't been done. And I take Labour's point that it's time for action. But then if these inquiries actually took place back then, how in God's name, were these issues not raised? Was this not such a big issue in public discourse back then? I don't remember it being, at least, not to the extent as it is now. So either those inquiries weren't just good enough, or something wasn't acted upon. And to my mind, I think, it is the demand of most people, rational people, that something, maybe a countrywide inquiry be held, that people know what's happening. And I support
that. Aisha, where do you come in on this? Because the other fault line in this conversation is about Islamophobia or not. And you heard the Conservative leader in the UK Parliament making the argument that if you're going to hesitate to say British Pakistani, which is what the dissent of most of those convicted in many of these cases has been, then you're actually smearing other British Muslims with the same brush. And Elon Musk, of course, has also added his tuppence to this by saying, why don't we talk about Hindu phobia and Christian phobia and Sikh phobia? Why is everybody obsessed with Islamophobia? As a Muslim living in Britain, how do you see, and as a women's rights activist, both, how do you see this issue?
So I'm going to kind of give a bit of context. I'm 44, and when I was a teenager, when I was at school, all my friends, I saw many of my friends being groomed, being picked up in cars outside the schools, and everybody knew about it. I was born in Keighley. I've grown up in Keighley. I have campaigned in Keighley about this topic. And what I find astounding, I'm 44, like I said, 30 years later, people are still using this topic as a political football. Where we are actual witnesses, first-hand experience, and we're not even consulted. Nobody's talking to us. What we find is people like Elon Musk and Andrew Tate and all these other politicians, well-known people with huge platforms, using this topic to have a go at Muslims. And can I just say, I was one of the first people to work with policy. I was advising the NSPCC on how to engage with the victims, i.e. getting more police officers, especially at night time when most of these horrendous crimes were taking place, encouraging victims to come forward. Now, nearly every single rhetoric I have seen, every single article, every single point of view I've come across this last couple of weeks has been, oh, nothing was done because the police were too scared to point fingers and to name the fact that these perpetrators were Muslims, they were Pakistanis, they were Asian, etc. Let's take a step back and look at how the police were categorizing these victims of sexual exploitation. They were basically deemed as not good enough as witnesses. They were not considered as victims. They were considered as willing participants in the sexual abuse that they were suffering. Police officers refused, even when they were given evidence, video footage, names, locations, they refused to intervene because they deemed the victims, who basically were obviously young, they were from vulnerable backgrounds, they were often in care, or they were going through familial breakdowns, relationships, they were considered damaged goods, and therefore the police did not want to investigate. The CPS let the victims down because they were considered a waste of time. If we were to bring these cases forward, the victims would be judged and so on, and therefore the perpetrators would get away. There was a lot of misogyny involved, which nobody's really talking about. So it wasn't just a case of, oh, this is a very PC topic and we can't talk about this. There was also the idea that these young girls, who young as 11, young as 12, who were basically left to these monsters to abuse, were basically happy to go along with their abuse. So this is something that not many people are talking about, especially not people like Elon Musk. He has literally not spoken to a single victim of CSE for the last 20, 30 years. These are grown-up women now. They have families of their own. Nearly 60% of the cases that police are now dealing with, about 65%, sorry, are historical abuse cases where women have come forward to talk about the abuse that they have suffered when they were children. So there is something that's being done about it. Now, when I was talking about this, 2008, 2009, 2010, I was part of policy. We were talking about how to make schools safer for children. And a lot of people would say to me, oh, we're so glad that you're talking about this because you're Pakistani and you're Muslim and you're not going to be accused of being racist, but we're too scared to talk about it. And that was making me so upset, and that makes me upset to this day, because people were too scared to come forward and cared more about being deemed racist than protecting those girls. And that, I mean...
So Aisha, you've said a lot of important things. I just want to hold you there, because I think the point that you're making is that many things are simultaneously true. That it could be simultaneously true that Elon Musk is playing his own game with no concern for the victims.
Absolutely.
It is simultaneously true that the police failed or approached this through a misogynistic lens, treating the women who were...
not, it wasn't just the police, the social workers.
And you also seem to be suggesting that there was an element of defensiveness in calling out the ethnic backgrounds of the perpetrators because of the fear of being seen as racist. Am I correct?
Absolutely. This is the background. Now let's take a look at some of the things that were said. Say, for example, Swala Braverman made comments that were basically lies, saying nearly all the grooming gang perpetrators were Pakistani Muslim men, British Pakistanis, which is untrue. Some statistics suggest 80% are white. Perpetrators of grooming gangs. Some suggest 42%. So this idea that this is only a problem amongst British Pakistanis is completely untrue. We had Sarah Champion, who is a Labour MP. She she wrote in a newspaper in 2017, and she highlighted this topic. And again, there was a backlash. She was forced to resign from the front bench. You've got obviously Jess Phillips, who's a good friend. She's an amazing campaigner. To be singled out by Elon Musk as though she is the only person that's responsible for allowing these monsters to get away is absolutely incorrect. And I am concerned for her safety. I'm not going to lie. We've seen Joe Cox being murdered over the far right narratives. Now, obviously, I'm afraid for Jess Phillips as well, and I have spoken about this as well.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I want to bring in Chris. But this point that you make, I remember when Braverman suggested that all of the grooming gangs were British Pakistani, then she had to clarify that what she meant was these high-profile cases that we're actually talking about, for example, in Rochdale and so on, where, as I mentioned, 8 of the 9 convicts were British Pakistani. But of course, if you extrapolate that to an entire country, then sexual predators, sexual abusers come from diverse backgrounds. So, Chris, the question then would be, why is Elon Musk fixated on this? What's actually going on here? The UK is an ally of the United States. Musk is now part of the Trump administration. I mean, we can't also separate some of these strands from what's going on. And Starmer, I think Bharat makes a good point. Why not a national inquiry? But Starmer also raises an interesting question. What were the Conservatives doing, for these past years? I know Rishi Sunak announced an inquiry in his first term. There were more than 500 men who were documented to be involved in this. How do you see what's happening?
Well, thank you for having me, Barkha. First of all, I think it is a national shame that this has happened, and I think it's a national shame that the British public, I think there's 3/4, according to a YouGov poll, 3/4 of the British public want a national inquiry. It's dragged out over decades now. There's been numerous independent inquiries that have come up with some good information, and we know the problems that happened in multiple sort of cities in the UK. So now we can sit back. I think now is the time that we do need to have a national inquiry into this. But it is multifaceted. What we're seeing is there's foreign interference. Elon Musk has also said he wants to choose the new party, the new head of reform, so that we've got all these different dynamics being played out. He's used basically Tommy Robinson, a very divisive figure who's had a history in sort of supporting sort of the threat of violence in British sort of the political system. Nigel Farage has sort of distanced himself away from that, but we've seen Elon Musk pushing Tommy Robinson, a very divisive figure who has been jailed for basically defamation. And so that itself has been a narrative that has been spun throughout this period. We've got to look at the actual sort of the politics of the international far right in this, because that is quite a big thing. Because whenever I've looked at the issue of grooming gangs over the years, I get a lot from India. I get a lot from Indians who are saying, well, Chris, why aren't you mentioning grooming gangs? So this isn't just a British story now. It's an international story. So why is Elon Musk targeting Keir Starmer? And I think if we look back to last August, when he said there was going to be a civil war in the United Kingdom and that kind of thing, he's got a bee in his bonnet about how we are dealing with these horrific acts of violence against immigrations in the UK. And I think he's got his bee in the bonnet about how Keir Starmer is trying to tackle that. The Americans, as we know, have different views on First Amendment and all these kinds of things. We saw it with Khalistanis, where basically Panon said he was going to blow up Air India flights. However, that is covered with US free speech. So Elon Musk is a massive proponent of free speech, but there are limits. And in the UK, we've tried to sort of legislate against it when it's causing violence.
But those are some excellent points for consideration. But at the same time, you do believe that there should be a new national inquiry. Chris?
Yeah, I think that the British public do, and 3/4 of the British public believe it. And I think for Keir Starmer to block it, as Bharat said, it looks as if they're covering something up. And as we all know, a lot of those places and a lot of those cities, they are Labour councils that were running those cities at the time.
Yeah. So again, I think what I appreciate in this conversation is that multiple things can be simultaneously true. And it's important to not get polarized into this camp or that camp. I'm just coming to you. One of the things that's happening is it's such an emotive issue. And of course, it would be emotive. And this would probably happen in any country, that vigilantes have now stepped in. And vigilantes are now going around, councils in England, filming men whom they say that they have trapped into confessing that they are actually groomers. And we're seeing some videos are so graphic and so inflammatory they can't actually be shown. I picked up one just to show you what's actually happening around England, how emotive this has in fact become. Let's take a look.
Front and back, arse and tits. No, you didn't say that. You didn't say that. You did say that. Are you saying no because your wife's standing there? You your life, haven't you?
No, I don't do the because I have a sex problem. I don't do that.
You have a sex problem with children?
No, I have a sex problem with my wife as well.
A sex problem with your wife as well?
Yes, yeah. So I don't
so
do
you
that.
like children and older ladies?
No.
See?
Please, forgive me.
Listen, there's no forgiveness in this. There's no forgiveness in this. Do you understand the damage? Look at me, please, when I'm talking to you. Don't be fucking rude. Do you understand the damage you do to children? Talking to them in the manner that you can speak to them.
Now, B, I want to bring you in. There are these kind of videos. They're flooded X, which is owned by Elon Musk. This needs to be mentioned every time we talk about something we pick up from X, that it is owned by Elon Musk. We can't ignore that fact. That's not an incidental detail.
Exactly.
Vigilantes do, however, tend to step into, we have seen this in India when there have been high-profile cases of sexual violence, whether it was the Nirbhaya gang rape or more recently other cases. For example, in Calcutta, you do have street anger. It is not, we can keep talking about due process, but street anger does spill over. This does happen. We want to believe in the courts, but people are restless. They say the system has let us down. When you see videos like this, and this is probably amongst the mildest ones we could find, the others are truly inflammatory and very graphic in detail. What goes through your head?
I'll tell you what goes through my head. I wonder if this should even be being rebroadcasted if you can't verify it. So I wonder how responsible that is. For starters, I would question that. The vigilante is Elon Musk. He knows exactly what he's doing. And I have to say, you've got to hand it to him, because he's using the framework and the language of progressives. He's using the language of women's rights to do the exact opposite. And we mustn't forget that. And if you want to get into the nitty-gritty detail and look at the grassroots level, don't share videos like that. Listen to Aisha, because she knows the community that she's talking about. And she has quite rightly acknowledged that we're talking about vulnerable and excluded and communities with multiple poverty indices and multiple challenges in accessing authorities of different kinds. It's very complex and it can't be solved by watching or sharing violent videos.
No, I actually think you make an. I just want to say you make an excellent. You make an excellent point. Yeah, sorry.
Subjects are being framed, and I'll give you one example from Donald Trump, who claimed that wind turbines were killing whales. Look at that statement. Does Donald Trump care about whales? Donald Trump doesn't give a flying about whales. We know that. He's doing something else. And the same thing is happening here. When unstable billionaires begin to rant about women's rights, we should examine that very, very carefully, because what they're doing is fueling right-wing extremism, dangerous violence. They're doing the exact opposite of what the language would suggest.
Yeah. And I actually do take your point, because as I was watching that video, I felt that we must at least cloak the identity of that gentleman. So we're going to do that for sure. But I do take your point. It needs greater reflection. How do we capture what's happening with these vigilante groups without platforming what they're doing with legitimacy? I concede the critique, Bree, that you brought to this. I want Aisha to add to that. What next? What do we do? Because there's all of this happening. And I was actually, I wanted to use it as an example to talk about what a dangerous sort of inflammatory social divisiveness this could create. And would that be best addressed by a national inquiry, as Chris and Bharat have argued?
I agree with Chris. I think we need to have a new inquiry. We've obviously got the excellent J report and all the recommendations that were suggested in 2022, which none were implemented, by the way. I think the new inquiry should also address what the impact or what contributions each successive government has done over the last 40 to 50 years. When I was witnessing my friends being groomed and picked up, it was 93, 94, 95. That was when the Conservatives were in power. So again, we've got all this like, oh, what you guys ain't doing enough, and oh, it's your fault and so on. No, it was actually a collective effort by people to not listen and not believe the victims, and therefore basically letting them down. So I think a national inquiry should include, what happened, why wasn't enough done, who was responsible, and you know what? If it means that Labour politicians or people associated with the Labour Party, which obviously I'm a member and I'm a voter as well, if they're in the sort of firing line, fine. Absolutely. If it's Conservatives, if it's a Lib Dems, this is not a political issue. This is a human rights issue. This is a safeguarding issue. And we need to get to the bottom of this. And we need to do it in a very impartial, non-emotional way, which sadly people like Elon Musk have basically exploited the situation. It's turned into this massive global story. We've got headlines from international outlets like yourselves and across the world, basically implying that Britain is overrun by British Pakistani Muslim Asian men who are just out there grooming and exploiting these vulnerable, these women, these children, and nobody's doing anything about it.
Yeah.
I mean, how is that making sense?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes left, Aisha. I know you have to go, but just stay on as long as you can as we close. Bharat, go ahead. You had your hand up, I saw.
To say, Barkha, look, as an immigrant, right? The man on the street doesn't know the difference between an Indian or a Pakistani or a Sri Lankan or a Bangladeshi. When stuff like this happens, he's just going to go and beat up whoever he wants to. And people like us are definitely in the line of fire as a result, right? So the way forward really is to address this trust deficit. This inquiry should be done in a much more open, transparent manner so people know what really happened. And also this idea of saying Asian grooming gangs, what in the world does that mean, really? Asia has billions of people. What does that mean? Multiple ethnicities, religions, and languages, etc. I went to university here and I studied South Asian studies. I still don't know what that means. So I think it's important for us to actually have clear demarcations as to what is what in some of these debates, because otherwise it becomes very easy to obfuscate and for people to take advantage. Ultimately, look, we have two girls. It makes me sick that some of these people are walking around scot-free. And if you've committed a crime as heinous as this, you should pay a heinous price.
Chris, I want you to speak to B's description of Elon Musk as the actual chief vigilante in this whole conversation.
Yeah, well, I think Elon Musk has a lot of political power. He's probably more influential than I would say Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch was a major figure in the Anglosphere. And I think Elon is a lot more powerful than him. So I think it's quite disappointing to see why he's pushing these figures and he's been so divisive. I really wish he would. If he is going to make a positive difference with his platform, he's going the wrong way about it. But I mean, this story is going to run and run. It's got diplomatic implications as well. Not only, I mean, once Trump becomes president, and how is the British government going to actually handle this issue? It's going to run and run. So it's going to be very difficult going forward.
Yeah. B, just before we let all of you go, you started by saying there has already been an inquiry. Are you more persuaded at the end of this conversation that there needs to be another look? Because clearly, as Aisha documents, everybody fails women, everybody fails young girls. Politics is noisy. It doesn't actually look after the interests of women and girls in particular, especially coming from the backgrounds that many of these victims have had very little agency in this decades-long political route.
I do wonder how much difference it can make. I think that successive governments, there's a sense that, an inquiry takes the heat off of them and it makes everyone feel better. Something's being done somewhere. will that actually land in the place where it's most needed? And I don't think it will unless conversations like this continue to take place. So I think it's incredibly important. Thank you for inviting us on, Barkha, because hearing what everybody's got to say, hearing from Aisha in particular, has actually given me more hope than promises of yet another inquiry, because it's just so important to consider what's really going on. The question that you asked right at the beginning, what is really going on here?
Well, many questions, no easy answers, but I think as journalism teaches us, what's most important is to ask the right questions and not actually get lost in the noise of the rhetoric. We thank you, in particular, Aisha. Couldn't have been easy sharing what you did, about your own experience and your friends. Thank you, B. Rowlett, Chris Blackburn, Bharat Ramanan, and to our audience. Thank you. It was a tough conversation, but an essential one, a complex one, and we'll keep trying to track this issue with all the complexity and the fair-mindedness that it deserves. Thank you very much, and see you all soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.